Benjamin Netanyahu could be replaced in office as soon as this week, with opposition parties deep in coalition negotiations to form a new government. But for now, that's been put on hold as Netanyahu deals with one of the most serious security situations in his 12-year tenure as premier. Well, joining us now for more is Mark Regev, senior advisor to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, speaking to us from IDF military headquarters in Tel Aviv. Mark, thank you for joining us. This is
pleasure, Calev.
Now, this is depending on how you're counting, this is maybe the 6th time that Israel has been engaged over the past, say, 15 years in a conflict with Hamas, some of that during Prime Minister Netanyahu's tenure, some of it before. But I think the question a lot of Israelis are asking themselves is, what is going to be different this time? We've seen the attacks. We've seen the IDF striking aggressively in the Gaza Strip. We've seen that in the past. And we've seen the situation, again, sort of develop and reach the point we are at now.
So it's true, Hamas is a problem. And unfortunately, they're a problem that's not going to go away. And we want Hamas to understand that their missile attacks on Israel are unacceptable and that they will think twice and 3 times before ever doing it again. And that's why we're hitting back hard. As you know, we've been targeting their infrastructure, their armories, their munitions, their command and control, their communications. We are hitting Hamas hard. And the idea is for them to understand that it is not in their interest to provoke Israel to be shooting at our civilian population the way they have been.
So how long will this operation continue for? What is the sort of end game that's been set for this particular operation?
As long as it takes. To those around the planet who are calling for an immediate ceasefire, we say that solves nothing. It solves nothing whatsoever. That would be a Band-Aid, a quick fix, and we'd only be back to square one in a week from now when Hamas would shoot rockets again. That's not our goal. We don't want a quick fix. We want to come out of this in a situation where we've got a long period, a sustained period of peace and quiet for Israel, that Israeli citizens don't have to live in fear of an incoming rocket. We believe that's possible. The IDF, as I said before, is hitting Hamas hard. We want them to understand that it is simply unacceptable for them to shoot rockets into Israel and for them to understand that it's not in their interest for them to shoot rockets into Israel.
Well, you mentioned the international reaction. Prime Minister Netanyahu did speak with President Biden yesterday. Give us a sense of how the Prime Minister feels that call went.
Well, he thanked the President for the American support for our right to defend ourselves, which is very important. And we appreciate that message from the President. And we also made clear that we have to now make sure that Hamas understands that there is no quick fix for them, that Hamas can't cry wolf and go to their friends at the United Nations and say, get this stopped now, when Israel is hitting them back. I mean, that's the game Hamas wants to play. They want to barrage Israel with rockets and then get, I don't know, the rotating Arab League member at the United Nations Security Council to turn around and say ceasefire. And they'll get some support for that at the United Nations. I'm glad to say that the United States has not allowed that to happen, and that we will finish this the way we want to finish it. In other words, we will get out of this crisis with a situation of sustained peace and quiet. The citizens of Israel will not and should not have to live in a situation where they have to be running to their bomb shelters because Hamas is firing rockets into our country.
Now, as I mentioned, Mark, the Prime Minister, the government is also dealing with a second, but certainly related crisis, the unrest in Israeli Arab cities. What we've seen is, I think, unprecedented. And the Prime Minister is suggesting an unprecedented response, sending IDF troops, deploying them in domestic Israeli communities. Is that a correct response and answer to what we're seeing?
Yes, and I'll explain why. I was with the Prime Minister yesterday up north when he went to Akko, and we visited with the mayor, and we met with the senior commanders of the police, both nationally and in the north. And the Prime Minister's message was clear. This sort of violence is unacceptable. This sort of violence is intolerable, and that we have to fight against it. We have no tolerance whatsoever for this sort of violence, whether it's Arab on Jewish violence or Jewish on Arab violence. Unacceptable, won't be tolerated. And the Prime Minister said if we need to beef up the police with the military, we'll do so. The law allows us to do that. And just as, let's say, the military were deployed in civilian areas during the coronavirus crisis to help deal with that. So the military can be involved in protecting the public. The law allows that to augment and support the police in their important job of bringing peace, quiet, stability to the streets of Israel.
Mark, there are certainly immediate reasons why we're seeing this unprecedented outburst of violence, the situation in Jerusalem, the situation in Gaza. But clearly there are some deeper social trends, political trends at work here in the Israeli Arab community. Isn't the government of Israel, the one that's been in office, or the prime minister for 12 years, and we have to say before that, somehow failing to deal with these underlying causes, perhaps, of this unrest?
Can I say the following? We were actually hopeful that we were on a more optimistic trajectory here with Israel's Arabs. We were seeing, everyone was talking about the Israeli Arab community being more involved in Israel, wanting to become more Israeli, being part of Israeli democracy in a full way, even them voting for Zionist political parties. In other words, there was a good story to tell. And unfortunately, this current internal problem with Israeli Arabs and the fact that we've seen this violence is something that is very depressing and disappointing. It doesn't mean that we give up on our vision of integration and of seeing the Israeli Arab citizens as full citizens of this country contributing. We can't give up on that goal. But firstly, we have to reestablish law and order in Israeli cities. That's good for Israeli Jews. That's good for Israeli Arabs. We want to see law and order on our streets, nothing less.
All right, Mark Regev, Senior Advisor to Prime Minister Netanyahu, thank you.